Hi everyone, I am Adolfo Neto, a professor at the Federal University of Technology, Paraná, and this is the Professor Adolfo Neto podcast. In this podcast, I interview great professionals from the field of computing and related areas. Today, I welcome Kris Micinski to the show. Kris is an assistant professor at Syracuse University in New York State, USA. He's a researcher in programming languages and the co-chair of the Scheme Workshop 2024. Kris, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for having accepted my invitation.
Thanks so much. Yeah, appreciate it.
So, Kris, before talking about the Scheme Workshop, let's get to know you a bit better. I see you have a bachelor degree in electrical and computer engineering from Michigan State University.
Yeah, that's great.
What sparked your interest in computer science, in your case, computer engineering?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. When I was a child, I was very interested in programming. I was very interested in designing my own programming languages. I think I had written a bunch of code in C and C++. And after a while, I realized that a lot of that code was kind of wrong. And then I learned about the idea that you could have a program that was, correct or had a precise mathematical meaning. And that was something that was very exciting to me. I just had this insecurity that kind of all the code that I ever wrote was kind of subtly broken in some way. And the idea that I could understand the code formally and rigorously, that was something that was very attractive to me and really got me interested in computing. I used IRC a bunch when I was a kid. And so I was on some IRC groups with people who were at various kind of schools like CMU and stuff like that. And they had told me to try out SML. And so I had been programming a bunch in, lower level languages, Python, kind of more traditional languages, Python, C, C++. And then switched to SML and eventually OCaml and learned about algebraic types and things like that. And that was very exciting to me. And then more recently, last 10, 15 years, I've been using a bunch of Racket, even though I still do a bunch of work kind of in the formal space where we write things down using types and, natural deduction and things like that. I often formalize them, or just kind of play around with them, experiment with them using Scheme and Racket. So that's kind of my interest in Scheme. I feel like it's a very beautiful language from the perspective of being able to get a lot done and being very experimental and being able to be very rigorous about structure without having to have the burden of making everything type check up front. Eventually, it might be the case that if you write a really good implementation, maybe you'll migrate it to working in something like Haskell or Agda or something like that. But I love being able to be very experimental about in kind of the way that Scheme gives you.
Okay, great. So you were exposed to SML. You got to know that SML existed during your undergraduate course?
Honestly, just during high school. My undergraduate, I think it was like many other people. I think I took a few classes. Many of them were kind of high level and not very relevant to actual programming. And then some of them were very good, very like hard classes that really taught me, how to code, mostly in like languages like C++ or something. I don't really know if I had any undergrad classes where we did functional programming. Unfortunately, I think I didn't, although I think in the time since I've left, my undergrad university has hired some folks that now I think do more functional programming. And I was mentored by a researcher, Laura Dillon, who was at Michigan State, who was kind of more senior, wasn't teaching undergraduate classes. So I took some classes from her. And that was very cool. I really learned a lot about decision procedures and kind of more traditional formal methods. She was using tools like Alloy and other things like that. So I got to have some experience with those tools. But the SML stuff, I kind of had just picked up on my own. And I don't know if I really understood it myself when I was doing it, just picking it up on my own. I think there were things about it that I didn't really fully appreciate. And it really took until graduate school and reading my own kind of, working with other people to see the various ways in which I, had some shortcomings in my understanding of things, I suppose.
Yes. That's interesting because, for instance, I even during undergraduate course, I was exposed to MuLisp, which was a very small version of Lisp, but the professor he didn't explain that, oh, this is a functional programming language. No, we are going to do it with MuLisp and learn this language. So I used to program in MuLisp, but with constructions that came from Pascal.
Right.
Which was
right.
my first real programming language. But okay. And about SML, when I was in graduate school, there were 2 students there. They were using SML for something, but I didn't learn at the time. So after your undergraduate course, you decide to pursue a PhD in computer science. The title of your dissertation was Interaction-Based Interaction-Based Security Policies for Mobile Apps at University of Maryland, College Park. What motivated you to do a PhD and to choose that subject for your dissertation?
Yeah, I was very sure that I wanted to do a PhD, even kind of in the early stages of my undergrad. I think I went to intern at a company, and my experience, I remember my last day working at the company, my manager said something like, you seem like a really good programmer, but if you work at the company, you're really going to need to think about how to make the company money kind of down the line. And to me, that was just not very interesting, and it wasn't exciting as like a career path. Now, I'm sure there are lots of other great places in industry where you can be very experimental and have lots of freedom. And I don't mean to imply that you can't. But at least for me, I felt very passionate about really being able to explore keep turning off these notifications as I get them from various tabs. Really being able to explore kind of the things that I was interested in. And so yeah, I think that was what was really exciting to me. And then as for the topic, I had been doing some work with Android when I was during my undergrad, did some undergrad research where we were doing some messing around with Android apps. And when I started my PhD, my advisor had a project running where we were doing dynamic analysis of Android. And I got kind of embedded in that project, and then it just kind of kept going. I think after I graduated my PhD, I was kind of more eager to do stuff that was a little bit less applied because I felt like a lot of the work that I did during my PhD, I just kind of got the feeling that, if the engineers at Apple or Google did the right thing, then a lot of the research would just be kind of irrelevant. And that was very sad to me in the sense that it felt like it was not very general. But, I think many people feel that way about their PhD. Just that they wish at the end that they had been able to do something a little bit different. And it was a very good experience from the perspective of my advisor being very conscientious about teaching me how to do the process of research, how to appreciate kind of the problems to care about, how to identify what research topics could be suitable to pursue and be able to turn into things that you might be able to publish. So from that perspective, I learned a lot. But Android security per se, I think I sort of wasn't as excited about towards the end. I kind of felt like a big portion of my PhD involved software engineering to make these pretty complex analysis tools just work on really large applications. And there's this kind of tension that you face often if you're going to do applied work, that often you can't really do very nice theory. You kind of have to do settle for some kind of weaker theory because you know how to implement it. And so that was the case as well, I would say. It was kind of things that were like not 100% sound. They were only just like sound within context of some limited environment, some assumptions. But then we were making dynamic analysis tools that actually worked at scale on some large applications. So that was very rewarding, although it was pretty heavyweight dynamic instrumentation. And so I'm not sure I would necessarily say that that's the future for everything. But it was a lot of fun, and it was pretty interesting, the work for sure.
And given your PhD experience, and from what I know, I spent 1 year at NC State University, North Carolina, and I was in a group where about half of the students, after they finished their PhDs, half went to industry, half went to academia. And you could, from what I know, you could decide, oh, I want to pursue a career in academia or in industry. Why did you choose academia?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, I really wanted to teach. I still really like teaching. Although I would say I became more and more interested in doing research over time. I think after my PhD, I felt very unsure of whether I would be able to find new research to work on that was completely independent from my advisor's direction. And there was a lot of kind of tumultuous sort of feelings there about just, would I be able to find a new topic that wasn't what I was working on? Would I be able to get traction? Would I be able to mentor PhD students to be able to find new topics? And I think eventually I kind of just, I started to feel that I really wanted to work on research where I was kind of driving the process. And I guess for me, that was kind of what made sense, So I really wanted to find a research-focused faculty position. I was teaching at a liberal arts college for a while, Haverford College for 2 years. I really enjoyed the teaching there, but it felt like a little bit of a slower pace with respect to PhD students. Like, for example, if you work with undergraduate advisees, they will eventually graduate pretty quickly and then kind of move on. And it's kind of hard to be able to do long-term work with them. And so for me, I was kind of more interested in going to an institution where I would be able to mentor PhD students. And I felt very anxious about whether I would be good at it or whether I would be able to, to be able to help them face all the fears of being able to get out publications and things like that. But eventually I kind of realized that it was really what I wanted to do in terms of competing, in research. And I think overall it was a good decision and I've been happy with it. But, there are different stresses in this job than a liberal arts college faculty job, for example, that are exciting and interesting.
Yes. So now let's talk about the scheme workshop. I will ask a few short questions, one by one. So the first one is actually two. What is scheme? I know it's a Lisp, but could you explain why another Lisp?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. I would first make a disclaimer and say that I don't claim to speak for the whole Scheme community. I don't claim to speak for the steering committee of the Scheme workshop or the program chair, Yu Kong. But I would say, to me, what makes Scheme really exciting as a distinct form of a Lisp versus any other ones is a real focus on minimalism, elegance, and a small number of features. If you look at other Lisps, there's a real emphasis on macros and building your own languages. And I think, that has a real serious place in the Scheme community for sure. Of course, the idea of languages as libraries and that kind of thing, and hygienic macros, that's all very relevant and kind of core Scheme material. But to me, the thing that really feels exciting about what differentiates Scheme per se is a focus on minimalism, a very essential understanding of things, a very simple way to present things in a way that's extremely simple and that you can run, that you can interact with, and so that's what Scheme feels like to me. It's like the essential core components of the language that grow out of the lambda calculus into a the kind of language that would be very friendly to use for a certain class of problems. Especially those that do manipulating over algebraic data and recursion and things like that. There's a real focus on functional, as in sort of pure kind of programming. It's not that you can't use impurity, so you can use set bang at the end of the day. Sometimes that is useful, but there's a real focus on immutability and a real focus on minimalism, even to the point of not caring so much about runtime. I would say Scheme is not a language where you're trying to be especially fast about your code. You're just trying to get the right asymptotic complexity so that you as the human can write code very fast and understand it very precisely, very rigorously, in a way that allows you to test it. And using simple data structures, lists, hash array mapped tries, things like that, trees,
And what's the Scheme workshop?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So there are lots of great venues that are adjacent to Lisp and Scheme that run the gamut from industry to academia. So in industry, you've got things like Lambda Conf and other conferences like Bang Bang Con, not exactly Scheme, but sort of exciting industry conferences where there's cool ideas. I think the Scheme workshop has historically been associated with ICFP, so the International Conference on Functional Programming. It's a presence of this kind of the Scheme ideas, especially as they surround and are relevant to academia, within the sort of functional programming kind of SIGPlan community. So the real purpose is to kind of get, especially I think junior students and also maybe senior researchers who have kind of off the wall ideas. So Scheme Workshop is non-archival. So you can submit papers that would go to top conferences, but you can submit them to Scheme Workshop, present them, and you won't have used those ideas from the perspective of publishing them, right? So it's non-archival. So we've had some papers that later went on to be, very influential papers, first get submitted to the Scheme Workshop, and then the authors gave a talk about them, got some feedback. I really see the Scheme Workshop as has a place for a few things. So junior students who are looking to submit papers and really get feedback on them because they're looking to polish them and they really want feedback from folks who are willing to give them detailed feedback, really willing to take a mentorship kind of focused perspective on their reviewing process. We're not looking to reject good papers. We have trouble getting, a ton of good quality submissions for sure, like many workshops do. And so we're really happy to accept work that's in progress, work that fits within the boundaries, is kind of done professionally, incredibly and thoughtfully, but maybe is not finished. Work that's kind of off the wall. Maybe it's not really clear where it's going to end up, but it feels very exciting and in line with the sort of Scheme values. I think that's really the purpose of the workshop, is to really have a place for that kind of work, especially things that are Scheme adjacent. So if you're doing any work with, macros, if you're doing any work with untyped functional programming, and really anything that feels like Scheme, right? There's lots of other languages like Dylan and Clojure and Dart, other things like that might be appropriate to submit. And those are totally in the bounds. And I would say for anybody watching this who might think, is it appropriate for me to submit to the Scheme Workshop? It's very acceptable to email the chairs and just kind of ask, do you think this topic is kind of relevant to the community? And we'll be happy to answer for sure.
And when you say that it is non-archival, you mean there are no proceedings?
Correct. There are proceedings that are published informally through that we make available, but they are not considered proceedings in the sense that they do not prohibit republication in the same way that if you submit to archive. So I guess I can't speak for every single venue. Maybe there are venues out there that have rules that say, if this has ever appeared to human eyes, then you can't submit. But at least that's our intention, is that the workshop is not going to use up your token to submit elsewhere, and should not preclude republication. And so that's kind of how it's been that way for a long time. I think at least 10 years. So I think this will be the 11th year. And we just found that when we had people submit work that could not go elsewhere, it made it really hard to get high quality contributions. People who were really excited to submit work to the Scheme Workshop, they kind of would think, well, maybe this is a really good idea. So if I submit here, well, then I won't be able to submit to a top conference. And so, and I think that many workshops are in a similar situation. And we really are trying to get a good cross-section of the community that is doing exciting work. And in pursuit of that, we want to be able to accommodate people who are doing work that is maybe very exciting, but just preliminary and could maybe go elsewhere, but we don't want to preclude them from, publishing a paper somewhere down the line, maybe at Uppsala or something like that. And then reviewers say, oh, well, but this was, sorry, but this was already appeared at the Scheme workshop last year. And so you can't submit. That's, we worry that would really prohibit people from getting exciting ideas to present to us. And we see the Scheme workshop as a very, the kind of place where you can come talk about your cool ideas and chat with similar like-minded people in kind of a small group setting. We usually go out to dinner. We usually have, fun conversations throughout the workshop. And it's kind of a more focused venue than a major conference. So for example, if your alternative was maybe presenting a poster, it might be the case that you chat with a few people who kind of walk by and, but at the Scheme workshop, you'll really have a long slot where you can give a talk, really, sketch out your vision and really chat with the other people at the workshop. And so that's that's what's really pushed us to make it non-archival.
Yes, that's a great idea. That maybe that could work also for Erlang workshop, which is it is archival. It has proceedings, but we know that some great works that use Erlang or Elixir are published elsewhere and not on the Erlang workshop.
Right. Something to consider, so for sure. But every conference has to make their own decision, or every workshop has to make their own decision, and there are pros and cons, to both.
And when is the deadline for submissions?
That's a good question. So let me look it up. I think it's in July sometime. But so here we have it as July 18th. I would say, I can't officially say that it will be extended, but we have had a history of extending the deadline, for better or for worse. So July 18th is the stated deadline now, and it's possible there will be an extension. That's at the discretion of the steering committee. So.
Yes, and I would to make it clear, because you are in the organizing committee, and is this part of the program committee? You are a chair of the program committee?
No, so I am the general chair. The program committee chair is Yu Kang. And the steering committee chair right now is Will Bird. So Will Bird was the person who got me to do this. I am the person who submits the forms to make things happen. And then Yu Kang is the person who actually does the work to actually make sure that we have great papers that appear in a great program. And so she's also somebody who's doing a lot of great work as well. And then I suppose my job is to make sure that things overall happen. The workshop happens, any last minute snags, making sure that we physically get space, interact with people at ICFP to make sure that the workshop has all the things that it needs. I will look into things like setting up video recording and things like that kind of thing, interface with various people for that, do advertising, that kind of thing. But Yu Kang is the person who's actually doing the substantive work when it comes to the program. I believe I am also on the program committee, so I will be reviewing papers as well. But Yu Kang is the person who's actually doing the work for that, for sure. And then, the steering committee right now is, I think, Will Bird, Olin Shivers, I believe, and then a few other folks that I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, and it accepts several kinds of submissions, full papers, experience reports, lightning talks.
Right.
I'm going to leave the link in the description, but I was curious about this item here. What's lightweight double-blind reviewing?
Great question. Lightweight double-blind reviewing basically means that So there's official instructions on it somewhere that we're taking from the rest of the SIGPlan conferences that have done this in the past. Basically, lightweight double-blind reviewing means that it's double-blind, but not to the point of having to obfuscate the work. So you should not put your name in the on the paper title, but you're not precluded from citing your own work as long as you cite it in the third person. I think also lightweight double-blind means that you can reveal your identity after the first round of the reviews. I don't think this is very relevant to the scheme workshop, honestly. But I think basically the idea in the past is that if a reviewer comes back and says, well, your work was done by, so-and-so, well, then if that is you, then you can say so in lightweight double-blind. When I think with full double-blind, you cannot. There are some other differences as well that are kind of more nuanced that I can't remember off the top of my head, but that is essentially the gist of it. Lightweight double-blind, I think there are some folks I think Mike Hicks might have a write-up on the purposes and some of the policies that kind of guide it. But I think the idea is just that you want things to be double-blind, but in practice, being fully double-blind has some issues practically. Now, in the case of the scheme workshop, I think mostly the purpose of double-blind reviewing, I would say it's probably mostly to try to make things more equitable, right? There are definitely people that, that will submit papers where we will know who the authors are just because it's a kind of small community. And it's kind of nice if you don't know who the author is when you're reviewing the paper. It just kind of makes it, makes it feel like, that much more I guess it's like you're that much more likely to give honest feedback. I would hope that at the scheme workshop, nobody gets mean feedback or rude feedback on their submissions. I don't think it's that kind of place, but it is kind of nice to be able to know that there's that barrier in place. And so I think there's some good purpose to that. Although on the other hand, I can't say that we wouldn't get results that are as good if it were single blind. I'm not sure it has a ton of importance for scheme workshop. I do think it's very important to be lightweight double blind, at least for major conferences. But, on the other hand, I would sort of say we're very happy to accept papers that are on topic and somewhat polished, have a good fit, seem like they would have a good vision. So we're really looking to accept papers, but, I think having it be lightweight double blind does seem like a reasonable choice. And I think the lightweight just means that you can reveal yourself after the first round of reviews, and you don't have to obfuscate your previous work. You just have to cite it in the third person, right? So.
Okay, one last question about the scheme workshop is that you write here that attendees with accepted papers can apply for a SIGPlan PAC grant to help cover participation-related expenses. Because I see that the notification for acceptance is on, August 12th. The event is going to happen in beginning of September. So it's a very short, if this was here in Brazil, well, it's not, there's not enough time for, so it's possible. Someone can submit a paper and expect maybe to receive some funding to attend the conference in person.
Yeah, that's a great point that I hadn't really thought about. I'll raise that point to Yu, Kong, and Will, and see if they have any thoughts on how to address it. I don't have a crisp answer. I agree with you that it doesn't seem like much time. So I'm not sure about that. That's a good question. I admit that it's a challenge given the tight time. Definitely something to think over. So I don't have a crisp answer on how to address that, but I definitely think it does seem like an issue to me as well.
Okay, so people can send an email to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if that's something that you think will impact you, definitely let us know. Definitely a relevant concern, for sure.
Great. So now 2 additional questions before my last question on learning. First, do you know Elixir and Lean, which are two programming languages created by Brazilians.
Yeah, I've looked into Elixir a little bit. I remember seeing some news about it, last few years. I don't know a ton about it, but I've looked into a little bit of your material, or kind of your some of the stuff you've talked about it surrounding it. It's cool stuff, and lately I've been seeing this bin language that was designed too by a Brazilian, I believe, as well. So very cool. Yeah. I guess I can't say much beyond the fact that I've looked into them a little bit, and they seem very interesting and cool kind of language exploration ideas for sure.
And second, can you summarize your current research and explain what people who want to do a PhD with you can do?
Yeah, great question. So I've been working a bunch on data log solvers, basically logic programming languages lately. Data log is a very simple language. I have some blog posts on it if you're interested in learning it. But I think the thing that makes us very excited about it is that it is a language that is able to be used to define static analyses and other kinds of exciting logic programming problems. For people who are interested in doing a PhD with me, I think the thing that would be helpful would probably be learning about kind of traditional symbolic AI, formal methods type material, especially things like DPLL, CDCL, SAT and SMT. I've become very interested in those topics lately, and especially how they relate to saturated chain forward reasoning. So that's data log where you don't forget any information, although that can really be a pain as well, and can really lead to space blow up in terms of algorithmic complexity. So we've been looking into extensions of data log like data log O and monotonic aggregation and EG, equality saturation, EGlog, that kind of work that can allow you to have more coarseness in your domains as well as you kind of execute the program. And so, yeah, if you're interested in doing a PhD with me, I would say things like EGlog, Souffle, Scheme. Honestly, a lot of my students start by learning Racket and Scheme and learn how to write little interpreters in it. But I do think that no matter who you do your PhD with, you want to find somebody who seems like their philosophy kind of matches yours about the kinds of problems they're interested in. And then, whatever you choose to do a PhD in, your PhD topic will vary a bunch over the course of time. You'll get very interested in one thing, like I was very interested in dependent types. And then, maybe you work on that area and you realize, well, there's not really a good contribution for me here. It's not an area that my advisor is working on, and then you stumble into something else. And then eventually you find a topic, and how that all happens is very, very kind of windy and circuitous. And, I would urge people who are thinking about doing a PhD to realize that their actual PhD experience will probably vary a bunch based on, it's probably going to be quite different than what they think it might look like going in. And so really, I think the main thing is to feel like you're passionate about understanding programming. You're passionate about logic programming in the case of, doing a PhD with me. But I would say just being passionate about tinkering with stuff and really being comfortable with rigorous technical ideas. I think that's something where you really can't, you really are going to have to get your hands dirty in terms of looking into sort of formal math and realizing the connection between programming and formal math. And that's something where if that's the kind of thing that sounds like it might be exciting to you, then definitely it might be worth considering doing a PhD in programming languages. And I would really strongly urge you, people who are junior students, I would really urge you to apply to PLMW, which is SIGPLAN's mentoring workshop. Happens at all the major SIGPLAN conferences. So PLDI, POPL, ICFP, and Uppsala all have PLMWs. And that is the kind of thing where if you're a student who's thinking about pursuing programming languages, even if you're in industry, so, I have some students of mine that I've mentored that have, now they've gone into industry and they're maybe looking to go back for a PhD. Even those people would be a great fit for PLMW. And I would strongly encourage you to consider looking into that if that's something that sounds like it might be a fit for you as well.
That's great. So my last question, which is one question which I have been asking all my interviewees is on the subject of learning. Because in our area, either as professor or as software developers, we have to stay up to date with what's happening. How do you stay updated with the news in your field? Do you prefer books, blogs, podcasts, YouTube, academic papers, video courses, MOOCs?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think as an outsider, you might be tempted to think that it was mostly academic papers. And to a degree, that's kind of true. Although I would say what happens, I mean, if you just go out and read a random academic paper, a lot of the times they're very boring and it's kind of hard to see if they're relevant to you. Are they, it's a ton of hard looking math, like why, what's it all for? And I think it can be very hard to be passionate about understanding all the deep formalism in things before you really have a passion for like, what's this doing? Like, what is the core problem? I was on a reading group yesterday with a great researcher who said something to me like, I don't really learn that much from papers. I mostly learn by talking to people and having conversations with them. I think that's very true. I've been trying to learn some mathematics on my own recently. A PhD student of mine and I have been looking into algebraic topology, for example, to try to understand things like sheaves and modern synthetic domain theory and stuff like that. And, you can really understand so much by just talking with somebody who's really an expert for a while. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by reading textbooks. That can be very necessary and helpful. I really do think there is a place for just going into the library and having a very quiet reading session where you take notes. I think that can actually be very useful and is crucial to do when you're at the beginning of stages of your PhD, especially. But you can't do that all the time, because you can really only get so far just by reading papers. And I do think figuring out the process of how is research done, how do researchers think about something, that's something that is really valuable that you get out of a PhD. You get to be in a research group where you get to go to lunch with people, you get to work on papers together, you get to be in reading groups where you kind of see how people break down problems, how they approach problems. Everyone has a different way of doing it, and everyone will have to find the way that works for them. And, I think, one thing about humans is that we all learn very differently. I certainly have my own way of learning things, and one problem that I face, I don't know if it's a learning disability or just, who I am, or maybe if just everyone is like this, it's very easy for me to just kind of read stuff and just kind of not get the point of it or understand, looks very hard, but like intuitively, what does it mean, right? And so humans are really making progress with their intuition, and then they're using their writing to explore and craft their ideas. And it's so easy to kind of look at the end result of what somebody's written down and think, oh, well, surely I should be thinking in that manner. Let X be a set with sort of, that admits finite limits or something like that, and but usually that's not really the way we think about things, right? It's just the way that we kind of formalize things and really, concisely state our ideas, rigorously interact with our ideas. When we really explore them, we're much more intuitive about it. And the way that you do that will really depend on a lot of factors for you. And, the way that you learn how to do programming is very different than the way that you learn how to do computer science research. Maybe if you're in industry, you'll have the experience of learning how to grapple with millions of lines of code in a big code base. And that's its own skill that's very distinct from academic computer science that academic computer scientists really don't understand very well most of the time. And so, whatever trade or whatever kind of, path that you take in life, you'll have some amount of learning that you'll have to do. And I think it's about being in an environment and surrounding yourself with the right kind of people to really support you. People in academia like myself are very privileged that we've been able to be in that kind of environment. And we want to create the best possible environment that we can for our students to have the experiences that they can. But but it's not easy. And I think, a lot of our life is about adapting and trying to, for example, I was very kind of stagnant with the stuff that I had done in research for a few years. I realized, well, I'm in kind of a very closed world where I kind of understand my stuff very well, but there's lots of other stuff out there that I don't understand. And so, a year or two ago, I started reading a bunch of papers in databases and have been getting very excited about that field, even though it's something I never did before. I really think that it's really crucial to cultivate a passion for something. For me, there's a lot of work out there that I think is very exciting and interesting stuff that I'm just not passionate about, and I can't really connect to it very well. And I think really being able to have opinions about something, being able to form a vision, that's, I think, what really leads to long-term research. It's not that an individual, they often say that academics, they don't just have one paper that really describes their vision often. It's usually the case that they have a stream of papers that are kind of all touching on their vision, but none of them perfectly articulates it. And, hopefully they all kind of hit a different point on it. And certainly that's the case if you watch like famous mathematicians who give lectures over time at these, these major places. So yeah, I think that's my feelings on it. It's different for everyone, and kind of everyone has to find their own way. And hopefully, whoever is watching this can find the right community to be able to support their ideas, things like that.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Kris, for sharing your knowledge with us. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Oh, no. Other than thanks for having me. Nice to see. Hello to everyone in the Elixir community and things like that. Consider submitting to the Scheme Workshop. Spread the word about it, especially to any junior students, people in industry who are hacking around with stuff they think might be like an academic submission. If you're thinking something like, well, maybe I should write this up, maybe people would really be interested in this. Get in contact with us. If you're really interested in mentorship on having your paper written, I'm happy to give you some feedback and sort of say, oh, this looks like it's heading in the right direction, or, oh, this looks like it's kind of missing some of these aspects you really might consider refining. Spread the word and, consider submitting to Scheme 24. And otherwise, thanks for having me. I was happy to do this, and I appreciate it.
Thanks again, Kris. A big thank you to our listeners, and we appreciate your time and attention. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
If you are curious and ready to take your Elixir language skills to the next level, check out my affiliate link to the ELX Pro course in the episode description.